Rebecca. Welcome back to watching my channel Grow to Gather, and today I wanted to talk about pruning tomatoes and how that's really one of the best things you can do to keep your tomato plants growing healthy and to keep them growing strong. Now if you're a beginner and you're just a bit afraid to cut your plants and damage them, I'm going to show you exactly what to do it right and make sure that you're doing it correctly. I'm going to show you where to prune, how to prune, and when to do it. So why exactly would you want to prune a tomato? A pruned tomato mainly is going to have a lot better airflow. If you look at a tomato that just grows on its own, it's kind of just going to sprawl and go everywhere, which is fine. They grow like that naturally and you are going to get some tomatoes. But it's going to get diseased a lot quicker just because the leaves are going to stay a lot wetter, they're going to be closer together, it's easier for moisture to just get there and stay there. It's easier for pests to crawl onto that plant and make their homes there and just take what they want and not leave as much for you. Pruning also lets you have your tomatoes a lot closer together, because if you're not pruning, you really want to have them a lot further apart because they are going to get more disease, because you're not going to have that circulation between your tomatoes if they are close together and you're not pruning. It also saves energy for the plant to produce more fruit, because of the tomatoes just growing branches that you don't necessarily need or want, or they're not going to have as much energy to put into producing fruit that you want to eat. So I honestly didn't prune my tomatoes whenever I first started gardening. I didn't really see the point in it, and I was honestly kind of afraid to do it because I was like, why are you cutting off those branches? You're gonna damage your plant. And you don't really 100% have to. There's a lot of people that don't believe in it, don't want to put the effort into it, and just don't want to do it. But I did find whenever I started pruning that I got much bigger tomatoes than I used to. It's not uncommon for me to get tomatoes that are 1.5 pounds in size for certain varieties, like a pineapple or something like that. And before I started pruning, all my tomatoes were pretty small, even though they were grown pretty similarly. So I have found, in my case, it does make a difference. So when and how to prune. I usually start whenever my plant's about 1 foot to 1.5 feet tall, and that's usually whenever they start developing suckers or whenever they start developing branches that are going to hit the ground. And then important things to keep in mind are the timing of when you're pruning, and you don't want to take too much of the plant. You don't want to take more than about 1/3 of the plant at a time. Sometimes there might be times whenever you kind of want to, just to get that stuff off, but you just don't want to cause undue stress for the plant and have things grow badly just because you take too much. And another thing to keep in mind is it's better to prune in the morning if you can, just because if you prune in the middle of the day whenever it's very, very sunny, it does cause a little bit more stress for the plant. And you also don't want to prune whenever it's just like overly wet, whenever like the leaves are just too wet, whenever you can cause the plant to like get just a little bit more like infected or things like that just from the moisture. So to actually prune your plant, you want to use either pruners or you want to use your fingers. I honestly tend to use my fingers a lot. You do want to maybe keep in mind that you might want to wear gloves. I honestly just am kind of lazy and don't always do that. But you will get a bit of residue on your fingers if you don't, but I just find it's easier to use my fingers most of the time. But if you do have a big branch, the pruners do really come in handy. Now you also want to keep in mind that you do want to prune indeterminate and determinate tomatoes a bit different. An indeterminate tomato will just grow and grow, and that'll be things like your Cherokee Purple, your San Marzanos, and they're usually labeled, but you do want to keep in mind that there is a difference between the two. A determinate tomato will be something like a Roma, where it's just going to grow to a certain height, put out a certain amount of fruit, and that's all it's kind of going to do. And you do want determinate tomatoes for things like canning or things where you want just all your tomatoes to come at once, and you want to be able to process them all at once. But there is going to be a difference in how you're going to prune those, and I will show that later in the video. So to prune an indeterminate tomato, I will take any branches that are touching the ground, any branches that look diseased, like anything that's showing yellow, anything that's really pest ridden with a lot of holes, or anything that just really doesn't look good. But I will take those, and I also will take suckers, and those are the branches that will grow between the main stem and a branch. It'll be like in the middle, and you want to take those off, and they will actually form a whole new plant if you take them out and put them in water. So if you do want more tomatoes for whatever reason later in the season, those might be a good way to get those, taking those and propagating them. And the main thing you want to really be careful that you don't take is any sort of top growth and any sort of flower cluster, and you will notice that those will have like yellow clusters of flowers or the buds that just haven't opened yet. But you don't want to take those because then you will be getting rid of your future tomatoes. And a lot of people will try to prune to a main stem, a central leader, and that will help keep your tomato from getting less unruly. There are some cases where you really can't do that because, like in my case, my tomatoes have been pruned in a week and a half, and they've grown a lot in that week and a half, and some of them like do have two main stems, and in that case, if they're really just too big, you don't want to cut them and really damage your plant that way because they're just too big to take off. Another thing that you're going to want to watch with the indeterminate tomatoes is you don't want to remove all the leaves that are going to grow over the top of the fruit, because you will get sunscald on these tomatoes whenever it gets really sunny out in like the middle of summer and they're just sitting out there. So you do want to provide a bit of shade for them and do keep some of the leaves off. You really only want to remove like the growth from the bottom 18 inches or 12 to 18 inches of the plant. Like I know some of the greenhouses around here you'll go to and it'll just be completely bare until the tomato reaches where it's going to be trellised. But you really just want to focus on removing some of the growth right at the bottom, and then you want to keep some of the leaves that are going to be above the first fruit cluster. So this is a tomato plant that I am pruning. And what I'm going to do first is see if there are any leaves that are touching the ground, and I will take off those branches. I tend to like to work from bottom to top of these. It just seems like it works better for me to go from one end of the tomato to the other. So I'm just taking those branches off of my fingers. And they are snapping off pretty well for the most part, but some of these I probably could have used pruners for. But I'm just taking those off. And this tomato hasn't really been pruned yet, so there is quite a bit to come off of this. And next I'm going to start looking for suckers, and there's one right there. It's growing between the main stem and another branch. And I'm just going and looking through and seeing if there's any more. And the yellow flower clusters I am going to go ahead and leave. So now I'm just working my way up, and it looks like it's done. So a determinate tomato, you are going to prune similarly in some ways, but not in others. Like you are going to want to take off any growth that's going to touch the ground, anything that looks diseased at all, and anything that looks like it's going to cause a problem of some sort. But you can leave the suckers just because they're not going to get as wild and unruly as an indeterminate tomato, because they are just going to grow to a certain size, and then that's just going to be it. But you just want to take off the bottom growth really. But the suckers are okay because they're not going to cause as many circulation problems, and you would be removing tomatoes that you would get otherwise, because I don't really think they're going to get much bigger. Prune a lot throughout the year. I do kind of stop a lot with the suckers once they get to a certain point. Usually the tomatoes are producing very, very heavily at that point, and honestly I just don't have the time to do it. But I think it's only really necessary until a certain point, because your tomatoes are just going to get tired and they're going to slow in their growth at some point. And once I get a lot of tomatoes, and honestly I just run out of time to do it because it's hard to keep up with pruning and processing a large amount of tomatoes. And at that point I will only really take off diseased limbs or things that are just getting too overrun. I can put up a picture of how my beds look typically in July or August, and it's kind of crazy, like a tomato pepper jungle. And it's a lot to be able to reach in there and be able to get things. So I will take off like branches like here and there, but my heavy pruning I typically only do through mid-July or so. And then I let them go. Tomatoes that are coming and focus on that. And tomatoes that I'm getting at that point. So that is the end of this video. I really hope you try pruning if you haven't yet, and let me know how it works for you. But please like and subscribe if you found any value in this. Thank you. Bye.